Hi everyone. One more quick thing to add on to lesson 1-4 for Algebra 2, and that is how to calculate outliers. Now we've talked about what outliers are before. Outliers are data points that are far away from the rest of the data set, but there is actually a mathematical calculation to be able to figure out whether or not something truly is an outlier. Okay, we can do it visually, but there's a more formal way to go about that. So here's how outliers work. We're going to go back to that inner quartile range that we talked about in the first video. And just to remind you, inner quartile range is the difference between Q3 and Q1. That's that middle 50% of your data. Okay, that's how far it's spread out. So to calculate outliers, what we are going to do is take that inner quartile range and multiply by 1.5. Okay, so that distance between quartile 1 and quartile 3, we're going to expand it by a factor of 1.5. And essentially what we're saying is that's how far from either one of the quartiles our data points are allowed to be before we call them an outlier. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take Q1, which remember is the lower half of the data set, and we're going to go backwards by this factor. Okay, and that's going to give us some magic number. So essentially we're taking Q1 and subtracting whatever this value is. Gives us a magic number over here. Then we're going to take Q3 and we're going to add that magic number, the IQR times 1.5. So we're going to do that over here. That's going to give us another magic number on this end. If our data falls between those two magic numbers there, our data is all good to go. But if I have any data that falls outside of those magic numbers that we just came up with, that would be considered an outlier. So I don't know if this description made a whole lot of sense with all these stars and markings and things like that, but we're going to actually apply it to the data set above, so you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, but that's how we calculate our outliers. So if I want to look at that data set above, the test scores that we were just working with, and determine if any of these are outliers, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to find my inner quartile range, which remember, it's this question right here about the middle 50% of the students. So step one would be to do 89 minus 71, and that gives me a difference of 18. That's my IQR. Okay. Okay. Then I'm going to take that IQR and I'm going to multiply it by 1.5. So I'm going to go 18 times 1.5. And let's see, I believe that's going to give me 27. Just double checking that. Yep, it is 27. So 27 is how far away I'm allowed to go from either one of the quartiles before I want to call something an outlier. Okay. So if we think about our data set up here, if I had set it up on a box and whisker plot, that quartile 1 of 71 would be here, and my quartile 3 of 89 would be here. Okay, that's Q1 and Q3. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go 27 in either direction off that 71 and 89. So I'm going to go 27 back this way. And notice that to do that, really what I'm doing is subtracting if I'm trying to go to the left. And I'm going to go 27 up this way. So I'm going to add 27 over here. Okay, so let's see. 71 minus 27 gives me 44. And 89 plus 27 gives me 116. So that range in between there, but from 44 to 116 that I just said, that's where all of my data should fall. Okay, I don't know what the word is for the opposite of outlier, but any data that's in this range is A-okay. Okay, none of this stuff can be called an outlier if it's within these numbers. So then we look at our data set and see if there's anything that falls outside of that range of numbers. Well, we know we're okay over here because these are test scores. We're not going to have any that are up at 116. So we know we're clear on this side. How about down here? Do we have anything lower than 44? And if you look up in that data set, we have a 43. So 43 just barely crosses over that threshold, okay? So the 43 would be considered an outlier in this data set, okay? So that's how we do that calculation, is we do 1.5 times the IQR, we subtract it from Q1, and we add it to Q3. And that gives us our range of numbers that our data set should fall between. I usually call it like the acceptable range for our data set. And if anything falls outside of that range, that's when we can call it an outlier. The important thing to notice is that outliers are represented as separate dots when you're making a box and whisker plot, okay? So like if I were to do a box and whisker plot for this data set up here, and I know you have it on your paper too, but if I was making a box plot for this data set here, I would not make my minimum be at 43. Okay, when I draw that first dot, just going back to this here, when I draw this dot here, I would actually set my minimum at 52, and then I would do a separate dot off to the side for 43. So it would look something like this. Let's see. I would have my minimum set at 52 because we already called the 43 an outlier. We would draw our box here, and obviously I'm not putting this on a number line like I should. Okay, which sort of defeats the whole purpose of doing one of these, but 98 would go here. This would be 71. This would be 89. What do we call our median? Median was 78 here. Okay, so this is what our box plot would look like. Then I would take that lonely 43 and give it its own separate dot down here because we determined it to be an outlier. The reason we do that is an outlier is supposed to be far away from the rest of the data set. And if I just connected this in here, it looks like 25% of my data falls within this range, when really almost 25% of my data falls within this range, and then I have just this one lonely score way over here. So just keep that in mind when you're making your own box and whisker plots, that if you do have any outliers, you do need to check for outliers first and then represent them this way on your box plot. Okay, hopefully that's enough to get you going on lesson 1-4. If you do have questions, there will be information posted about how you can go about asking for help, and I hope to be talking to you soon.